From that introduction, I think you can probably understand that there's very little about me that's unusual. In most ways, I'm what you'd consider a fairly typical retired engineering manager, company, technology company founder. That type of individual is fairly common. And it's not the reason that I've made this effort to come out to talk about meditation. You know, on a personal level, I've been married for over 40 years. My wife and I have 2 grown sons. All of this is, I'd say, very usual, kind of typical. The fact that I've been meditating for over 45 years is the salient thing that maybe is different enough for you to justify spending some time. And I'm hopeful again that this will be useful to you. You know, from my experience with meditation, it is something that has to be experienced. Meditation is not a spectator sport. And there's no, as I understand it, and as I've come to understand it more, meditation is not an activity that's reserved for just those people who are studying philosophy or theology, or those who are practitioners of a certain belief system. Meditation, I think, is equally available to each and every one of us. The experience in meditation is something that all of us can achieve if we have a pulse, if we have breath in our bodies. We're able to find an aspect of ourselves, to discover an area of ourselves that usually is well hidden. And in this particular meditation practice, which is called meditation on the inner light, the goal is to uncover that aspect of ourselves that will allow us to have a deeper perspective, not only about who we are, but on the nature of life in the outer world as we, experience it from day to day, hour to hour, and minute to minute. So that, in a nutshell, is the goal of what we're trying to accomplish, or what this program of meditation on the inner light is all about. It's important that, I look at things in a very pragmatic way. I come at this from an engineering perspective. There's a lot of discussion around, these types of ephemeral sort of intellectual sort of creative thinking types of concepts that are not as pragmatic or as capable of delivering results as I would like. And I'm attracted to meditation as it's looked upon as a science, where if you take in a laboratory a certain set of instructions and a certain set of ingredients or constituents or components, and you put them together in the right way under the right conditions, you can have a verifiable result. And in a very same type of way, I think we can look upon meditation as being capable of yielding verifiable results. And this is really important, at least it is to me, because if we're left to our own intellectual processes to evaluate the pros and cons of meditation, we're going to be drawing upon experiences that we've had in the outer world, intellectual understandings that we've achieved through reading or through some other forms. And it's not the same because we're building on experiences in a traditional sort of way that we collect them externally. Meditation is an experience of something that we all possess internally. And it's through the experience of meditation that we're really capable of attaining some references, some perspectives that will allow us to find some inner peace, find some way to evaluate, the way that we're living in a different way, in a more constructive way. And in that sort of understanding, I'd like to proceed. I know that a number of you have tried meditation. And I want to say right up front that there are so many different types of meditation. I've tried many myself, and I've sort of stuck on to this simpler form because I think, the mind likes complexity. And from my vantage point, this was the one that provided the greatest experience. But I don't mean to diminish any other type of meditative practice that you might already be engaged in or you might be interested in. There's so many different potential ways that meditation can provide value, and there's so many different verified meditative practices that have become standard in education, in medicine, and in so many other areas and disciplines. So if you find that there's one that works for you, I would encourage you to continue it, but I would also encourage you to take a look at this one and give it some time and try to do this one as well. And I think, with your own experience as your guide, you'll be able to discern which is the most productive for you, or however many you wish to try at the same time. I mean, these are called contemplation, was another term for meditation in the past. Even in some religious structure situations, they would call it prayer with attention. There's guided meditations. There's different kinds of yogas. Again, I think meditation is probably, some form of it has been around since the beginning of time for human beings. And I really feel like it is perhaps the most basic human endeavor, the most basic human activity. And I encourage you to continue doing the meditative practice that works best for you. To me, some of the attributes of a meditative practice that I find sort of encouraging is that it is non-exclusive. I believe that meditation, as a most fundamental human sort of practice, needs to be accessible to all, needs to be available without a lot of intellectual preparation or understanding or a dogma type of adherence. And I think also that it should be something that doesn't require a great degree of physical stamina or flexibility. Again, I think meditation as a universal human activity needs to, include all the different conditions that human beings find themselves in. So again, it's something that I feel like it's universal. If you're a student of meditation, you can be an academic, but you don't have to be. If you're a student of meditation, you can be strong and flexible, but you don't have to be. You can be wealthy, but you don't. There shouldn't be an impediment for a certain amount of cash or money. That's why the library system is perfect for this, because I really believe that the libraries model this idea that valuable instruction and valuable information should be given freely. And I believe that's the same case with meditation. So with that sort of fundamentals or sort of background, I want you to think about those types of concepts as we go through the more practical aspects of this. Again, I come at this from an engineering perspective, and for us to have a useful discussion around meditation, it might be useful to define a couple of terms. In engineering speak, terms get overloaded, especially terms that have slightly different meanings in different contexts. We're going to be talking about things that might, be understood by some people a little bit different in the way I'll be describing them or the way I intend them to mean in the next 45 minutes or so. So let's do some terminology review. If I use the word saint or mystic, as was used in the introduction, all I'm talking about is someone who has mastered the art of meditation. Could be male or female, could be a religious person or not. It's just basically someone who's been able to achieve a certain experience level within their meditative practice. That's all. And I think those individuals have different qualities and different attributes because their perspective is different based on what they've been able to understand through their experience. I mean, experience is so important because if we try to intellectualize something like meditation, it's impossible. It would be like trying to describe to somebody who's never had anything sweet what a chocolate bar tastes like. There's no analogies that the person can make, that you can make to help the person understand that experience. And likewise, meditation is purely experiential at the level where it has the most benefit. And that experience is something that can only be understood by having it. And so I just want to make sure that, if we talk about these things, those attributes that a mystic or a saint has can be described in general terms, but they can't be specifically shared, like that description of chocolate. If we talk about the word soul or spirit, that's a heavily overloaded term because it has so many different meanings in different, situations or contexts with different communities. When I use it this evening, what I mean to describe is the energy that enlivens us. It's purely looked upon by me right now for this presentation as being that aspect of ourselves that provides our brain with its ability to think and provides our body with its ability to process and to do respiration and to move its muscles and function in general. So those are, qualities that separate a live individual from a dead individual. And of course, in many different communities or in different philosophies, that is identified as soul or spirit. But I want to look upon that as consciousness. It's that awareness of our thoughts, awareness, and it's the energy that allows those thoughts to propagate and to be analyzed. And it's that energy and that consciousness of where our body is positioned and how we can move it to function in this world. Those are the simple sort of terms that I think, if I can think of any more. Let's start with that, and if we come up with another one, we'll stop and try to make sure the definition is shared in common between us. It's really important that we look upon this practice as something that's available to each and every one of us. It's, for sometimes, we hear about something new and we might think of, oh, that's something that's only for a certain group, or that's only somebody who's been trying something for very long. I've encountered individuals who've been able to sit in meditation and have experiences, quite profound experiences, early on. So don't shut the door on this or consider yourself to have these things to be unavailable. Quite frankly, you may be very surprised. The mystics I've studied under talk about things in a very pragmatic and simple way. They talk about three aspects of human beings, all human beings. We have a body, right? And we can, actually, the body is wonderful because it lends itself completely to the approach that, in our society specifically, we've taken in the last couple hundred years. And that's a scientific sort of approach. The body is something that you can put on a scale and weigh, you can measure it, you can analyze it chemically. We've developed all sorts of scanning technologies so that we look inside the body. I mean, the whole approach that we've taken and the scientific methods that are employed now are perfect for the human body and for science to, expand on our medical technologies and capabilities. So we've got that major component, the body, one of the three. And again, it's a great, study focus for the scientific approach of our societies today. The second is the mind. Now, while the mind isn't quite so present and sort of tactile and capable of the scientific method or being studied by weighing it and analyzing it in this way, it still lends itself to some investigation through scientific methods. The scientific method itself is pretty general. You study a system and you develop a hypothesis, an educated guess on how that system will respond under certain conditions, and then you design experiments to prove or disprove the hypothesis. And you run those experiments and you draw conclusions, and then those conclusions become observations for the next iteration of that. Well, and that works well for the body, but even for the mind, if you think about the mind's, the tests that the psychologists do, or the chemistry that's, involved with the brain analysis on the functioning of the brain. And of course, there's all sorts of brain scans. And so there's ways that it's not quite so concrete, but there's ways that we can explore what's going on with the mind and with the organ of the brain that sort of underlies the mind's functioning. And so those are, not as, the mind is not as easily studied, but it's definitely become more and more a focus of investigation and study, and they've made great progress. The third component the mystics talk about is the one that this meditative practice is all around creating an experience of, and that is the soul or the spirit. And again, when I talk about soul, what I want you to think about is energy and consciousness. It's the energy that enlivens the body, it's the energy that enlivens the mind, and it's the consciousness that makes that energy focused and purposeful in what it's allowing us to do. It's also conscious in a different way. The mystics talk about this aspect of ourselves being somewhat connected to what they call is a larger ocean of consciousness. And it's like they describe this aspect of ourselves as being like a drop of that ocean, and that it operates independently when it's encased in the body and the mind. But when it's released, either through meditative practices or at the time of death, it has the potential to have a greater experience of that source of consciousness, that source of energy. Now, those are happy sort of descriptions, right? Those are sort of comforting descriptions in a way, but they're just simply concepts until the experience is attained. I mention it because the idea that this is something that each and every one of us can have is sort of a fundamental requirement to encourage us to put in the time and effort to be able to get past those things that we normally spend time thinking about. The mystics say something really interesting about this. They say that this aspect, this spirit, this consciousness, this energy that sort of powers every aspect of ourselves is demonstrated, its manifestation externally in our day-to-day life is our attention. The outward expression of our soul is our attention. And I think that's really fascinating because if you think about attention being a sort of commodity, we have so many utils of attention that we decide how we're going to spend, or I don't know if we actually consciously decide how we're going to spend, because attention is a valuable commodity for marketers and for people who are trying to sell us something, because they know if they have our attention on a particular subject or a particular product, they may get our dollars, which will follow our attention. But the idea of our attention being this commodity is something useful to consider, because what we find ourselves doing every day is having our attention drawn out of us into the world. I mean, scientists can tell us that 83% of our sensorial input comes in through our eyes. And that stimulation, visual stimulation, is one of the primary ways that our attention gets tied into the world. It's a very strong connection that we have visually. 13 or 14% comes in through auditory sort of stimulation, and the rest is taste, touch, and smell. So it's mostly visual. And there's a whole lot of science that goes around and identifies exactly how that attention would be best captured by different websites that are trying to sell us something. We're all familiar with the fact that if you go and look upon Amazon or some other sales place for a pair of boots, those boots are going to show up on your browser for the next 2 or 3 weeks, or some similar products. They're all about trying to understand exactly who we are, what our demographic is, and what our likely images might be to grab our attention. And this is, it's somewhat frustrating at times, but it's important to realize the game that's being played. When we try to meditate, what we're doing is trying to regain control of that attention. Meditation is nothing less than focusing our attention on a place and on a point that's different. We want to focus it on the inside and not let it escape outside. The mystics have so many different analogies that they talk about with respect to how attention is being exploited. And one of them had this sort of visual that I was attracted to. They said that our attention is like water flowing through a pipe. And the pipe is 100 foot long. It's this pipe that has a particular need for a certain amount of pressure at the far end in order for it to perform its job. But all through the pipe are little pinholes, kind of like a soaker hose. And as the water pressure is high up front, where it's coming right from the soul, by the time it gets to the end of the pipe, the pressure is very low. And if you look up the pipe and look back to its source, you see all of these little sprouts of water that have come from these pinholes, where the pressure of the water, the pressure of our attention, is being wasted and lost. And this is sort of the habit of what we've gotten into, is we think about things, we're worried about, so many aspects of life. For a guy that's retired now, who's got 2 grown children, you can go back and look at my history when we first got married. I was concerned about creating the right financial base to have a family, to be able to support a family. I was worried about the health of our children when they came along, and I was worried about the education for the children. And all of these concerns are like aspects, they're important, but they're sort of out of control in a way, because we can't shut those concerns off. As human beings, we have plenty of areas where our attention is sort of choosing its own path out. We have these sort of concerns and responsibilities, and we also have an underlying concern about death, because we know that as much money as we amass and as much comfort as we can create around ourselves, and as much support we can provide for our loved ones, it can be taken in an instant. And so there's never that, or it's very rare, that an individual will be able to control all of those types of emotions and redirect the attention that is normally taken by those concerns into something else. It's a rare individual who can do that. The mystics say the meditative practice provides such a blissful experience, such a wonderful perspective, that not only does it allow us to have our attention redirected internally towards those experiences, but after the experience, after the meditative practice is done for the day, the sense of confidence that we have that there is an aspect of ourselves that is truly impervious, that's truly not subject to some of those concerns and fears, sticks with us. It continues with us in a way. And that is sort of the important part to remember about. If we can have the experience, the potential benefit of the experience allows us to take a fresh look at the situations we find ourselves in life. There was a really interesting story that was told by one of these mystics years and years and years ago, but it stuck with me, so I'll try to share it. And it has to do with this very topic. The story goes something like this. It's a fantasy, it goes ancient kingdom kind of story. So there was a kingdom long in the history, long past. And the kingdom was operating really smoothly. Everybody was happy. Everybody felt that they were respected, that their labor and their work was meaningful, and they lived in harmony. And this, was because there was a particular king who was conscious of the needs of the individual, and he designed and tried to create environments that would reward and support individuals at all different ways and all different levels. But the king knew that changes happen, problems come up, there's always something new to consider and something new that needs to be resolved. So he kept a cabinet or a group of advisors, 10 people who had, certain intuition, certain capabilities, certain intellectual power, rational power, creative abilities too. And he kept these people ready to help if and when a particular problem rose. And if a particular problem arose, he would bring them and assign their, focus their attention to see if he could get the solution that was needed. But to keep them on their toes, he would, give them problems to solve so that they weren't going to, become sort of lax in the way they approach things. So one day the king brought them out into the courtyard and he gave them a problem to solve. And the king took his staff and he drew a straight line in the sand in the courtyard, a line that was about 4 feet long. And he turned to the advisors and he said, which one of you can shorten this line without touching any part of it? And, one by one, they declined, saying, well, they would have to move the sand over the one end or the other of the line in order to make it shorter. But as the story is told, the last one stepped forward, and she was least ostentatious in her dress and her presentation, least taken by her role as a king's advisor. And she just stood forward and she asked the king for his staff. What she did was she drew a line parallel to the king's line, but her line was 6 feet long. It was 2 feet longer than the king's line. And now she didn't touch the king's line, but now if somebody new came into the courtyard and they were asked to point out the short line, they would point to the king's line. By perspective, she shortened it. It's kind of a clever solution. But how it relates to the topic is the king's line represents all the stuff that happens to us day in and day out. It's the good stuff that happens, and it's the difficult stuff that happens. And the good stuff is the spouse that listens to us and appreciates us, or the children who are, successful in whatever endeavors they're engaged in. The good stuff is that kind of thing, the financial benefits that might come our way. All those things, might make us feel really elated and happy. The bad stuff is the opposite. It's the people that don't listen to us. It's the fender bender. It's the problems that come up physically or emotionally, and those types of things that create havoc and turmoil in our lives. It's the people who at work don't respect, or whatever it is that creates those anxieties and those concerns and give us the tension that we find in life. That's all represented by the king's line, both good and bad. The longer line that was drawn by the advisor represents experience that's available in meditation. The meditative experience provides us with a new perspective. First of all, it's extremely real. It's in some ways more real than the experiences we have day to day in the outer world. It's more real than the chairs we're sitting in. It has the potential to give us a new way to look at things, a new way to look at the, all of those kinds of roller coaster experiences that we find in life. We can still appreciate the good things, but we don't get totally addicted to them. We can still be concerned about the challenging things that come our way, but they don't represent all of the, the concern doesn't escalate to a point of paralysis or create a sense of gloom or doom in our being. It gives us a fixed perspective. I remember one, it's like a fixed point. There was another description that's sort of similar to this, and let me just see how much time we have. There was another description that's similar to this, and that was one of the mystics was talking about when he was young. There was a huge amount of rain. I'm guessing he was, 5 to 8 years old or something. There was a huge amount of rain, and he and his friends were playing out near a swollen creek. And what happened was the banks of the creek where he was playing had become so soft that it had no bottom. And it was like a mud pit where the bottom was not felt. And so he started to sink in, and he was not within reach of anybody or anything. His friends were too small, and there was no vegetation, plants, or trees that he could grab onto, and so he was sinking in. He realized that the more he moved, the faster he sunk in, and so he waited, and still sinking but slowly, an adult came along and reached over from a firm piece of ground and was able to grab his hand and pull him up. And what he took from that is how important it would be to have a reference point, a firm, fixed reference point, where we get trapped in this kind of mudslide of normal experiences, and to have something fixed, something that's not subject to the kinds of anxieties, the decay, the things that normally provide us with a feeling of instability and insecurity. To have that come directly from us, from within us, gives us that confidence and that perspective to face life's challenges without the anxiety, without the kinds of concern. We still have the problems, but we don't have to feel the kind of desperation that might come from them without knowing that there's an aspect of ourselves that's more durable, more blissful, and in some ways, fearless. Because in experiencing it, there's a recognition implicitly that there is some part of ourselves that survives the ultimate fear, which is death. Now, it sounds far-fetched, and if it does, that's good, because I think you need to come into this with a sense of show me. And if you can have the experience, then that level of confidence will stay with you. There's something really fascinating about this, this part of ourselves, because the mystics describe it as a sense of complete oneness and connectedness, a sense of fearlessness, a sense of enormous bliss and the lightness of being, a kind of buoyancy, a sense of strength and power without feeling it's in comparison to something else, but just in itself. I don't know how to describe that, but there's something timeless about having some of these experiences and boundless that make it something profound enough to be of use after the meditative experience. And those are the ways I think that having a meditative practice can provide inner peace, even through the tumultuous holiday season that's been compounded with the pandemic, where we, definitely want to take precautions and be careful in certain ways. But we don't want to let our anxiety, sort of inhibit our ability to appreciate and enjoy the holidays and those people who we share it with. And that includes the entire planet in a way, even though they're not immediate neighbors or family. We do know that this entire, world is right now sharing a pandemic with us. So having this experience allows us to go through the concerns and the stress that might come from this holiday season in a way that we're able to appreciate things more profoundly. That's the important part of this. And what I'd like to do is, if you have questions, you should certainly send them on to Lorraine, and I'll try to make this as focused as I can on your particular interests. So I don't want to just ramble on, which I like this topic and I can do that. I wanted to talk a little bit, if we have no questions right away. Lorraine, please stop if there are questions. Let me know how to read them. The soul is described, as I mentioned, as a drop of this consciousness, part of this ocean of all consciousness. I think about the word consciousness, and I think about the word attention. I'm sort of fascinated by the choice of these terms. If you look at attention, as we experience, how our attention is being taken from us, or how we're focusing our attention to solve particular problems or to read a book that we really enjoy. We took it to the extreme, hyper-focused attention. If you have found yourself unable to think of something else other than the subject of your attention, a lot of people would say that situation arises when we find ourselves in love. We have a romantic interest in somebody. We'll be unable to stop thinking about them, which is sort of, it's a beautiful thing in a way, but, you'll be trying to do whatever tasks at hand, but you'll catch yourself thinking about this individual, So this concept that attention and hyper-focused attention and consciousness may be connected to the concept of love helps me, because I can see in so many traditions this word love show up. And, it's something that as a kid, when I was trying to understand different traditions, I would say, well, how can, this love be developed? And again, I think it comes through experience. I think it comes through understanding aspects about ourselves that are fully conscious aspects that sort of are the foundation of ourselves, below the mind and below the body, that energize both. And if we can tap into those and understand them through experience, then those concepts of consciousness and attention and hyper-focused attention or love make sense to us. It's also, interesting to me to have this idea of an ocean of consciousness that's responsible for each and individual particle in this universe, which is a concept that I've been introduced to as well. And again, this comes from more of a science background, but if you can bear with me on this point, because I find it really fascinating. The idea that when we meditate, our goal is to see inner light, right? It's an experience of light that is different than external light. It's an experience of light that fills us with this feeling of bliss and a buoyancy. But light itself is really nothing more than a wavelength of energy. Light is, in its pure form, as beautiful as it is energy. So if you think about the entire universe being maintained through this consciousness or this energy, say that we're tapping into something like this when we meditate. Now, just follow me on this if you can, because I think it's really fascinating. There should be some reflection of that concept in science. Right? We're talking practical here. It's pragmatic. It's not, fantasy. So, back in the 1980s, the subatomic particle physicists came up with a concept called string theory to describe the nature of matter itself, the smallest building blocks of matter, which are smaller than molecules, smaller than electrons, protons, and neutrons. They were called quarks, and there are, a dozen or more of these tiny particles that they were able to identify. And mathematically, the best way that they could to explain quarks was to say that they are the manifestation of mass, polarity, rotation, or spin that came from very, very small vibrating strings. A vibrational energy was behind all of the universe, all the physical universe. And that was back in the mid-1980s. Since then, of course, as science goes, they try to, disprove these theorems, and they try to come up with something different. Well, they haven't. What they've done is they've built upon it in ways that I can't even pretend to understand. But the point is that subatomic particle physicists have sort of validated some of these same concepts that have been around for centuries and centuries in different meditative practices, which is basically the universe is a manifestation of energy that came from some sort of source that each and every one of us has a tiny particle of it within us. And that's sort of in a nutshell what's the attraction for me. Now, conceptually, that's kind of nice, but without experiencing it, it becomes sort of a useless mental sort of exercise. What I find fascinating is that science and spirituality may actually intersect at some point in the future more clearly. And to me, that's interesting. I'm hopeful that you found it a little interesting as well. So we want to be able to understand ourselves more fully by tapping inside through a simple meditative practice. We want to be able to experience this for ourselves so that we can put things into a better context, into a more realistic context that are happening to us day to day, month to month, year to year. You know, it's something that each and every one of us can experience, and it is something that perhaps was easier for cultures in the past to experience that weren't so tied to the technologies that really are designed to take our attention in the current days. You know, we're all about, 5 or 6 different methods of messaging and cell phone interactions and text message interactions and Facebook and I don't know what other kinds of social media there are, but these are all designed to draw our attention into some conversation or into some situation or some image or whatever. And so I'm wondering if centuries ago, even before light extended the workday, if people had a simpler sort of lifestyle that might make it easier for them to meditate. I know my grandfather was, a dairy farmer in northern Vermont, and he probably interacted with fewer people in a week than I interact with in a morning, and I'm a retired guy. It's a much different. We're the same individual as far as our capacities to, understand and balance and, interact. But it's a much different situation we find ourselves in today. So when you practice this form of meditation, you should be very, what I would say is forgiving of yourself. If your mind has been going out for decades and doing certain sort of thought processes when you have downtime, it might want to do that again. So let me just review the simple form of meditation, and we'll try it for 10 minutes if there's no questions. And then we'll have a few minutes after it to see how things went. Meditation on the inner light is very, very simple. First is you find a comfortable place to sit. Couch, a comfortable chair like this one, or floor, if that's better for you. You just want to find a place to sit that you can sit in for a long time without moving. If your back hurts, you can lie down, put your feet up on something. You don't have to sit, but you should try to be still. And you don't want to be so comfortable that you fall asleep, because that defeats the purpose. And not a big deal if you do fall asleep, just try it again. So you find a comfortable place to sit. You want to find an environment to sit in that isn't, loud or have conversations going on, so that you're not distracted with sounds. You don't want to sit in a place where you're like right next to a kitchen where they're making different types of foods, because that might be distracting. Find a place that doesn't distract. And then the next thing is close your eyes really gently, like you're going to go to sleep. You don't want to force your eyes shut. You don't want to strain any part of your body. You want it to be completely relaxed. But when you close your eyes gently, you're robbing yourself of a lot of stimulation. I said before, the scientists have measured, the senses, and they say 83% of sensorial input comes in through the eye. So as soon as you do that, whether you're conscious of it or not, the brain is familiar with having a certain amount of activity just based on stuff that it's passively experiencing. So when that happens, most people start to have thoughts, and the thoughts can be of any kind. So you're in a comfortable position, you close your eyes, you keep your eyes in the same plane they'd normally be in. So you're not pushing your eyes up or down, but then the thoughts come. So very, very common. to many, many traditions, East and West, is to repeat 1 to 5 words that you can say silently with the tongue of thought, they say. But you want to say them slowly, and you want your full attention to go into the words. Now, if you're a religious person, you can say the name of God in your faith. That's fine. If you're not, you can say any words that don't generate thoughts. Some people like to pick generally positive words like love, unity, peace, and then repeat that. Love, unity, peace. Or other positive words. Refrain from just reciting a poem, because you might start thinking of where you first heard the poem or the poet or whatever. So you want to create this stillness within your mind, but you want it to be positive. It's challenging for some because they're used to doing many, many things at one time. And, we're all guilty of that because we're trying to cram in as much experience as we can. But I think ultimately, if we do one thing at a time, we're going to do it better and more deeply and more profoundly. And I'm talking about outer mundane things. But if we, carry that sort of level of activity or mode or approach into a meditative practice, we'll definitely be more successful. So we want our full attention to go in whatever words you pick. Now, when you start to have focus, you're putting your attention right in front of you. You're concentrating on these words. And if you think about a place to put your attention in, that it's nice to do it in a dark room, or use something like, these blindfolds that you can buy. You want to make sure that you don't have interruption through the ambient light that might come in through your eyelids. When you have a bit of that stillness, you might feel like your feet have just disappeared. They have not become like numb, like gone to sleep, like they might do when you're sitting on them wrong while you're watching a movie or something, but they might just melt into oblivion, and your hands might be the same feeling of just disappearing. If that happens, there's nothing wrong. You shouldn't move them. Try to avoid being aware of them. You're trying to keep all of your attention right in front of you and repeat those words to keep your mind occupied, the words that you've chosen. But if that happens, that's actually a good thing. I mention it because some people stop when they feel that. When your sensory currents are withdrawing, at some point in that withdrawal, you'll start to see circles of light or flashes of light inside, different kinds of light. Not like, a two-dimensional screen like you're looking at on a computer screen, but light of a different nature, different kind. It has a dimension to it. And if you keep your attention focused there, it expands and becomes stable, and it goes on to different vistas. And this creates an awareness of us that we have this depth within us. Even before the lights become, amazingly bright, there is this awareness that there is something in us that we've not seen before. And sometimes when that, happens, the mind goes, whoa, what was that? I didn't do that. And then, the process gets somewhat halted. Just keep yourself present regardless of what happens, and keep yourself focused right in front in that darkness, and repeat the names that you've selected or the words that you've selected slowly. And if your mind goes off, starts to work on the shopping list or whatever it is for tomorrow, don't berate yourself. That's okay. It happens. It does happen to everybody, and just bring it gently back. One of the mystics talked about how we have to befriend the mind. We have to make it a partner with us on this effort. And so comfortable position, close your eyes gently, keep your attention right in front of you, keep your eyeballs flat in the same plane they would normally be in if they were open, and then find some words to repeat. Name of God works for some, find other words. If the words start to generate thoughts, pick new ones. And we'll sit for 8 minutes. I took you over a little bit. I don't want to go past. We'll just sit for 8 minutes, and I'll let you know when the time is up. If anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in a chat box. Please leave off. Well, that was just 8 minutes. I'm not sure if anyone was able to really have a chance to focus. If anyone wants to share any of their experiences, feel free to bring in a comment or I don't know if you can raise your hand on this platform. But in general, I just want you to know that meditation can be that respite, can be that experience can provide us with a new perspective. And a good meditation sitting is like a near-death experience. And like those people who have had near-death experiences, they come back with a renewed understanding, an appreciation, and a lot less stress about the things that happen day to day, because they understand there's a more permanent aspect of themselves, something that is not subject to death and decay, something that will give, I think, a potential for a greater sense of purpose and feeling of bliss and unity. So I think that's, the goal for us as we try to find ways to live stress-free or a life with less stress is to deep inside ourselves come across this part, this important aspect that we all possess, and be able to enjoy it, and from that enjoyment understand that it exists. In doing so, we can provide ourselves with a better opportunity to relate to the things that happen day to day. So thank you all for taking the time to join this 1 hour program. I hope you found it of use, and I hope you get a chance to practice this at home and develop your own meditation practice. The goal would be for you to stretch the 10 minutes into 30 minutes. Often the scientists tell us it takes 30 minutes for the mind to process all the thoughts that it normally is, occupying itself with. Early in the morning, they say, is often the best time because you've had the night to, process some of the previous day's thoughts. And so, again, sit whenever you can. If you can sit in the morning, that might be the easiest and best time. But try to expand your meditation practice to get up to at least 30 minutes. Again, I really appreciate you taking the time this evening, and I hope it's useful for you.
Thank you so much, Gerry. It was very useful information. We appreciate it, and we do have a couple of questions. If you suffer from anxiety, should the words that you repeat to yourself be something like, I am calm? Is that helpful? Or is that sort of just distracting and does it keep your focus on that anxiety? Is it better just to do something a little bit more generic?
Oh, I think, it's all, specific for the individual, but rather than bring a reference to the I am, you don't want to use the sort of familiar concept of being something. You can use the word calm, serenity, use the goals as separate nouns in a way and not create a sentence. What we're trying to do is to put the mind into a different sort of space where it's focusing on the goal or focusing on the feeling and not so much the action of being, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does make sense. And about how long does it take to make this a habit?
That's a really good question. Again, we've studied this, and some people say 40 days of doing something and the mind will want to do it. The one really good thing we have going for us is the mind's a creature of habit. And if you can do it every day for 40 days, some people say 30, but normally in a 30-day period, people are going to miss a day or two. So I'm saying go to 40, and if you miss a few, you should still have the benefit of having the habit developed.
Right. And how can you get a young person interested in this? I mean, there's been studies that say it's so beneficial for young people, especially because they're even more immersed in the social media and the noise than we are.
Yeah, no, it's really challenging. And you don't want to create tension around meditation where you're forcing somebody to do it. So depending on their age, you want to make it a reward system because the ultimate goal of meditation is to be its own reward. But as kids are trying to, just get into it, you can try that. First and foremost, though, if you are a parent and you're trying to encourage your own children, the example you set is the most powerful thing you can offer. Anything that we say to the kids, if it's not reinforced through your own experience of life and example that you're setting, has very little meaning. Because the kids are so astute, and they're very perceptive, and they know exactly what's going on. So we first have to model the behavior and have some sort of demonstration of its value. But you can also encourage them and reward them for trying, I think. That's my particular view, but I'm not a child psychologist.
Do you feel comfortable telling people what you've gotten out of meditation, how it's been beneficial to your life?
Well, I would say that it's benefited me in many ways. I do feel that it's allowed me to take the challenges and even the rewards of life in stride a little bit better, where I won't get so wrapped around the axle about things. Everything, as little as having somebody cut me off while I'm driving, to something more profound where, there's a crisis of one kind or another when I used to work full time, or in with family situations. Those types of things, the crises are mitigated to some degree, because the awareness is there in the background that this isn't the be all and end all. This isn't the most important thing that's going to be the most important aspect of life. To have experience, like near-death experiences, those people who've come back from near-death experiences, profound ones, they've written so many books. And in the early 2000s, somebody wrote a book about what happened to those people 10 years after they had those profound experiences. Did it have a lasting impact? And the answer was yes. They changed their professions. They viewed their contributions to society differently. They went into fields where they were helping people more, because they understood that this was more valuable than whatever engagement they might have that would have prioritized the personal gain financially or whatever other things that they were into. I think meditation has a similar type of result, where you end up realizing there are aspects of life that we, sort of clung to out of fear, that we don't have to be quite so anxious about, and that we can prioritize on something else. And so I think, it happens differently for everybody, but I'd say definitely there's a broad spectrum of benefit.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Any other questions? Okay.
Lorraine, thank you for organizing this and setting it up. You made it so easy just to be able to tune in, not having used WebEx before, but I found it was just fine. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I mean, this is a great time of year to think about adding something that can improve your health and state of mind. January 1st is always a good time when people think about making important changes in their life. So thank you for giving us direction on how we might do that.
Very good. You're welcome.
All right. Thank you all for joining us today.